Hi, it's been a while. This is John Swin of exposeyourenemy.com. I'm sure we have all seen the terrible events that have transpired recently and throughout this entire century in the Middle East, and I'm sure everyone who has been paying attention to the content we've put out over the years on this channel and elsewhere will be very much better informed than the vast majority of the general public. So there's been a huge amount of omission regarding key details that have led up to the circumstances that we are currently witnessing. In order to explain how we've got to this point, we need to look back in history. There is a lot to get into. I'll start with this clip.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran. Now, I'm more militant and more militaristic than the president. I believe in strength. But to start a war in order to get elected, and I believe that's going to happen, would be an outrage. Iran can be taken down in many ways. Their population is in turmoil. They look at what's happening in Syria and other countries where it looked like it was an impossibility, and it looks like that one's going to collapse also. So Iran can be taken. I would never take the military card off the table. And it's possible that it'll have to be used because Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. But you've got to exhaust other possibilities. And we're in a great position to do it. They know, or they at least must know, that they're in a little bit of heat because there's a lot of pressure to attack. This is a great time to negotiate. Unfortunately, we have a president that doesn't know the first thing about negotiation. We have a real problem in the White House. So I believe that he will attack Iran sometime prior to the election because he thinks that's the only way he can get elected. Isn't it pathetic?
I don't need to point out the irony of this clip and the complete hypocrisy of Trump to any of you. Trump was also completely wrong like usual. Obama didn't launch a war on Iran. He didn't need to in order to win an election against Mitt Romney. I argue that Obama starting a war would have made his re-election a lot more difficult than it was. Obama won very comfortably, another thing Trump got wrong. You also heard Trump mention how Obama couldn't negotiate and alludes to himself as being this great negotiator and deal maker that he markets himself as, and that he still perpetuates today despite being exposed as a complete fraud. This statement was made after Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize, which is irrelevant when you understand why he received the award. It is also relevant because Trump is obsessed with Obama receiving it and the fact that he hasn't.
I'm back.
I think I'll get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things.
Mr. President,
I think I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things if they gave it out fairly, which they don't. They gave it out. Well, they gave one to Obama immediately upon his ascent to the presidency, and he had no idea why he got it. And you know what? That was the only thing I agreed with him on.
If I were named Obama, I would have had the Nobel Prize given in 10 seconds. He got the Nobel Prize. He didn't even know what the hell he got it for. Remember, he got elected. Well, so did I. He got elected, and they announced he was getting the Nobel Prize. Remember, he said, "Oh, what did I do?" He didn't know what the hell he did. He got the Nobel Prize for doing nothing. For getting elected, but I got elected too.
I'm going to come home early. I'm going to show you what a great job. I just got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Because when Obama got it, nobody knew what he got it for, including him. Remember, they said, "What did you get it for?" I don't know. That's how different. We have to work harder. He got a Nobel Prize, and he didn't have any idea why he got it. And then he started dropping bombs 2 weeks later on some place that didn't work out. Couldn't work out because he had John Kerry negotiating, who was the worst. Incompetent. Now, it's so sad that Iran, that horrible deal.
well, they should give me the Nobel Prize for Rwanda, and if you look, the Congo, or you could say Serbia, Kosovo, you could say a lot of them. You could say, I mean, the big one is India and Pakistan. I should have gotten it 4 or 5 times. I should get it for the I would think the Abraham Accords would be a good one too. But what do you they won't give me a Nobel Peace Prize because they only give it to liberals.
Now let's take a look at the peace prizes that Donald Trump has received for doing Israel's bidding.
Donald Trump received an award from the Israel Heritage Foundation in appreciation of his efforts to forge normalization agreements between the Jewish state and 4 Arab nations under the Abraham Accords. The award, a menorah, was presented to the former president at Mar-a-Lago on February 26, and the following inscription was on the plaque at the menorah's base. According to Rabbi Katz, one of the presenters of the award, the president was very excited to see us. He remembered me from July when we gave him the crown of Jerusalem for moving the embassy to Jerusalem. In case you don't remember, last July, the Israel Heritage Foundation presented Trump with the Crown of Jerusalem Award, which was a silver Torah crown contained in a glass box.
These awards were basically made up by this Zionist organisation to feed Trump's ego and keep him doing Israel's bidding. They know he loves to get praise and told how amazing he is and how brave he is. Really smart move by the Zionists here, continuing to pander to the fragile, narcissistic snowflake. So let's take a look at the reason why Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize, the one that Donald Trump doesn't want you to know about. Quote, for his extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples, unquote. Even after receiving the award, Obama continued on in the same vein and was able to successfully negotiate a deal with the Iranians, something Trump stated he couldn't do. Then, after Trump was proven wrong, he criticised the deal at every turn, and one of the reasons why is because he was wrong and his ego can't stand it. Another reason is that he is jealous of Obama. And what have we seen Trump do since he took office? The complete opposite of behaviour of the reasoning behind Obama receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. He's been on a rampage to weaken international diplomacy, disrupt trade, create uncertainty in the markets, destabilising the world, behaving erratically, threatening to invade and take over his neighbours, bombing places halfway across the world, creating chaos all over the place, including his own country, where he's sending the National Guard into California, and he's got his ICE thugs rounding people up and throwing them in prisons abroad without due process. Anyway, while the world burns, let me get into this Iran deal. So in September 2013, Obama and the Iranian President Rouhani spoke by telephone, the first high-level contact between US and Iranian leaders since 1979. Relations were improved and Iran was becoming more integrated with the rest of the world and proved that they could be negotiated with and be reasonable. This is an aspect that might not mean much to you or I, but to the hardened Zionists, this infuriated them, because this isn't the image they want you to have of their enemies. They want you to view them as savages, Muslim extremists that can't be reasoned with, driven by ideology, fueled by hatred of Israel, and dreaming of dropping a nuclear bomb on poor little innocent Israel. So their depiction of Iran can be sold to you as your enemy and sell you on the huge amount of bilateral aid in arms and military equipment Israel receives from the United States being justified at the expense of taxpayers and future generations. You can also understand why the military-industrial complex wants the same thing, because they're the ones receiving the government contracts and making a lot of money at the expense of taxpayers and future generations. The reactionary anti-Iran hawks, with all their vested interest, ignored any understanding of diplomacy and what the deal achieved. It is almost as if they want a cloud of mystery surrounding Iran's nuclear program so they can continue the Hasbro propaganda campaign that Iran is always on the verge of creating a nuclear weapon. The truth is, on one hand, the anti-Iran hawks know they can't risk trying to overthrow the Iranian government if they have a nuclear weapon, yet they want the public to believe they have nuclear weapons or on the cusp of making one to justify regime change. It would be quite funny how these mindbenders operated if it was fiction. And once you understand this, you understand how Obama politically outwitted the anti-Iran hoax by opening Iran's nuclear program up to transparency. You can also understand how this situation imposed on Iran puts them in an awkward predicament, and how obtaining a nuclear weapon would be a deterrent. Other countries upset with the Iran deal were also regional rivals of Iran, such as OPEC powers, which I'll be covering their response and how they fit into all of this, and how it never gets the coverage it deserves. So after the Iran deal was made, this entire anti-Iran network, financed by the military-industrial complex corporations and pro-Israel billionaires, made up of lobby groups, pressure groups, think tanks, all the neocon hawks such as John Bolton, Frank Gaffney and their Islamophobia network, and all the pro-Israel evangelical kooks such as Joseph Farah, and all the false opposition alt media shills and grifters that litter social media with their rubbish Hasbro talking points, attacking Obama and crying about how bad this deal was. They all made a big fuss about it, and Trump still does, despite stating Obama couldn't get a deal done. So, I guess Obama couldn't win no matter what he did. He got attacked with claims he couldn't negotiate a deal. He does a reasonable deal and gets attacked for doing what Trump alleged was a bad deal. Then we have the total irony of Trump's terrible move to pull out of the Iran deal, seemingly without negotiating anything, and making other terrible deals that he's been a part of that have led to the current situation. Now listen to what Obama said at the time before Congress voted on the Iran deal's approval.
Now the final criticism, this is sort of a catch-all that you may hear, is the notion that there's a better deal to be had. We should get a better deal. That's repeated over and over again. There's a bad deal, need a better deal. One that relies on vague promises of toughness and, more recently, the argument that we can apply a broader and indefinite set of sanctions to squeeze the Iranian regime harder. Those making this argument are either ignorant of Iranian society or they're just not being straight with the American people. Sanctions alone are not going to force Iran to completely dismantle all vestiges of its nuclear infrastructure, even those aspects that are consistent with peaceful programs. That oftentimes is what the critics are calling a better deal. Neither the Iranian government or the Iranian opposition or the Iranian people would agree to what they would view as a total surrender of their sovereignty. Moreover, our closest allies in Europe or in Asia, much less China or Russia, certainly are not going to agree to enforce existing sanctions for another 5, 10, 15 years according to the dictates of the U.S. Congress. Because their willingness to support sanctions in the first place was based on Iran ending its pursuit of nuclear weapons. It was not based on the belief that Iran cannot have peaceful nuclear power, and it certainly wasn't based on a desire for regime change in Iran. As a result, those who say we can just walk away from this deal and maintain sanctions are selling a fantasy. If, as has also been suggested, we tried to maintain unilateral sanctions, beefing them up, we would be standing alone. We cannot dictate the foreign, economic, and energy policies of every major power in the world. In order to even try to do that, we would have to sanction, for example, some of the world's largest banks. We'd have to cut off countries like China from the American financial system. And since they happen to be major purchasers of our debt, such actions could trigger severe disruptions in our own economy and, by the way, raise questions internationally about the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. That's part of the reason why many of the previous unilateral sanctions were waived. What's more likely to happen, should Congress reject this deal, is that Iran would end up with some form of sanctions relief without having to accept any of the constraints or inspections required by this deal. So in that sense, the critics are right. Walk away from this agreement, and you will get a better deal for Iran. Now, because more sanctions won't produce the results that the critics want, we have to be honest. Congressional rejection of this deal leaves any U.S. administration that is absolutely committed to preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon with one option: another war in the Middle East. I say this not to be provocative. I am stating a fact. Without this deal, Iran will be in a position, however tough our rhetoric may be, to steadily advance its capabilities. Its breakout time, which is already fairly small, could shrink to near zero. Does anyone really doubt that the same voices now raised against this deal will be demanding that whoever is president bomb those nuclear facilities? And as someone who does firmly believe that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon, and who has wrestled with this issue since the beginning of my presidency, I can tell you that alternatives to military action will have been exhausted once we reject a hard-won diplomatic solution that the world almost unanimously supports. So let's not mince words. The choice we face is ultimately between diplomacy or some form of war. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not 3 months from now, but soon. And here's the irony. As I said before, military action would be far less effective than this deal in preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. That's not just my supposition. Every estimate, including those from Israeli analysts, suggest military action would only set back Iran's program by a few years at best, which is a fraction of the limitations imposed by this deal.
While the exact scenario of what played out with the United States' role in the Iran deal was unforeseen by Obama, he did know without the deal, war was the only option on the table if a future president wanted to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, something President Trump has done, and by latest intelligence reports suggest he has fallen short in doing so, leaving the Middle East on fire and in a far more precarious place. If Trump wishes to actually destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, he would need to escalate the situation with more attacks. Iran has been attacked and justifiably have a right to defend themselves and respond. Obama also stated that strikes on the nuclear facilities, even if they were successful, they would only set Iran's ability to produce a nuclear weapon back a few years at best, according to military analysts. There is no doubt that staying in the Iran deal was the best option for preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, which Donald Trump states is his goal. One can conclude that Trump is a complete imbecile, and he should immediately step down or be removed from the presidency of the United States. Obama also correctly predicted the opposition
about this deal and the most consequential foreign policy debate that our country has had since the invasion of Iraq. As Congress decides whether to support this historic diplomatic breakthrough or instead blocks it over the objection of the vast majority of the world. Between now and the congressional vote in September, you are going to hear a lot of arguments against this deal, backed by tens of millions of dollars in advertising. And if the rhetoric in these ads and the accompanying commentary sounds familiar, it should. For many of the same people who argued for the war in Iraq are now making the case against the Iran nuclear deal. Now, when I ran for president 8 years ago as a candidate who had opposed the decision to go to war in Iraq, I said that America didn't just have to end that war. We had to end the mindset that got us there in the first place.
Ironically, the complete idiot Joseph Farah took this quote and put it in his blog post opposing the Iran deal, proving Obama right. Farah went on to make the absurd accusation that Obama's comment was anti-Semitic. Now I want to share with you how this network that Joseph Farah was part of weaponized Islamophobia and fearmongering. They were responsible for smearing certain members of the Democratic Party and appointees of Obama as secret Muslims, colluding with the Muslim Brotherhood and hating Israel, etc.
The Jews in America who have any allegiance left to Israel better realize that Obama is an enemy of Israel.
Well, that's my next question.
Well, Obama has been Muslim Brotherhood from the beginning, and Hillary Clinton has Huma Abedin, who was her, I'm convinced, lover and her top associate for years, and the two of them have been Muslim Brotherhood. Hillary and Obama have been the greatest gun runners in American history. And they are secretly, and have been secretly, going back to when Chris Stevens was first sent into Benghazi, it's been Hillary and Obama running guns to the al-Qaeda-affiliated militia and into Syria, all in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood.
He also, again, wears a ring that has Islamic Arabic script on it. He's wearing a Muslim ring. He is a Muslim. Well, I mean, this is incredible.
This smear campaign was used with a number of goals in mind. One is to stoke paranoia, sow distrust of the Obama administration, and convince their audience to align to the more Israeli-friendly Republican Party. You can see at this point, Alex Jones and his guests had established to the audience that Muslims were the enemy, which aligned with the propaganda pushed by those that launched the war on terror. This is despite the fact Alex Jones claimed that 9/11 was an inside job, something Jerome Corsi had also asserted. Yet they had somehow managed to use their platform to reassert to their audience that Muslims are their enemy, while at the same time claiming to oppose the war on terror. It doesn't make much sense. By this point in time, however, the billionaire class and their minions had launched their own wars domestically, their culture wars, waged to create division in the working class, blaming Muslim immigration for all the problems in Western countries became a go-to distraction. This whole network has thrived off of this, and is one of the reasons we have to suffer through the misery they've inflicted on us. Now I want to point out how this network smear campaigns also work as a form of political pressure. For example, if Obama withdrew troops from Iraq, they'd respond by saying, "Look at the secret Muslim handing over Iraq and all their liquid gold to the Iranians." How un-American. Is Obama even an American? I heard a rumour he was born in Kenya. We've still not seen his birth certificate, etc., etc. You can start to see how these conspiracy theories work together as a coordinated psychological operation. The Islamophobic fear campaign was used with a number of goals in mind. One was to stoke paranoia in their audience, sow distrust of the Obama administration and Democrats to get them aligned to the more Christian. The dehumanization of Muslims is another key goal, one shared with the Israeli regime, who have managed to carry out a genocide against a largely Muslim population with the backing of the United States. Absent from this network's discourse is the role of the military-industrial complex, the neocons, with their strong alliance with Israel and Israeli lobbying, and the war on terror that they launched. We jump through hoops to avoid these topics and come up with any ludicrous conspiracy theory to distract away from them, while muddying the waters around these topics with disinformation. There is clearly a coordinated effort to distract away from how Israel have benefited from the destabilization of Iraq and Syria, even seizing part of the Syrian territory, and now they have emerged as a regional power, normalizing relations with enemies of the increasingly isolated Iran, which takes us to another reason for this network's hatred of the Iran deal. They want Iran to be isolated. There is a snippet from the Jerome Corsi clip that caught my attention.
Hillary and Obama have been the greatest gun runners in American history.
From what I know, that looks like a form of deflection away from people Corsi is associated with. People Corsi alludes to helping get Trump into office.
About 3 years ago, a group of generals came to me, and it was explained to me they were ready to conduct a coup d'etat. They were ready to move Barack Obama from office with military force. And then a few weeks later, I got another call and said that they were reconsidering. You know why they were reconsidering?
No, why?
Because they talked to Donald Trump. And Trump agreed that he would run. And they agreed that if he would run, they would conduct their coup d'etat as a legitimate process, rooting out the traitors within government. And that pact between the military and Donald Trump has held. As we've been interpreting and watching, and Alex has been following QAnon, QAnon is military intelligence and close to Trump.
One of the people that Corsi is referring to is retired Major General Paul E. Vallely, who was calling for a coup against Obama. I made a video covering his involvement in military psychological operations, the development of mind war, and a pro-Trump propaganda disinformation psychological operation known as QAnon. Corsi was a key promoter of QAnon, alongside a disgraced Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, another key piece of this network. The retired general's plan for a coup was also mentioned by litigious gadfly and self-identified Messianic Jew Larry Klayman on none other than the Alex Jones Show.
You know, maybe Obama's pushing to the point to maybe someday they will wage a coup in this country. I'm not advocating that, but I know that some of these retired generals and admirals have talked about it. I know that. It's been in the public domain because Obama, and I'll say it straight up because no one else will, you will, Obama is a Muslim through and through. Obama sympathizes with a Muslim caliphate. Obama sympathizes with the mullahs in Tehran. He sympathizes with the radicals in the Far East, and that's why he never holds any of them accountable. He doesn't sympathize with Christians and Jews. He sympathizes with his own people.
Without outright mentioning the Iran deal, the reference to Obama being sympathetic to the Iranians is clearly a reference to it. We can start to see how the whole inspiration of this planned coup and the plan to help Trump get into office was a reaction to the Iran deal. Getting back to Corsi accusing Hillary Clinton and Obama of being the greatest gun runners, it reminded me of the most famous gun running operation ever exposed, Iran-Contra. It just so happens that this very network has extensive ties to not only Iran-Contra, but the arming and training of death squads and junta forces throughout Central America, not to mention the CIA drug trafficking Barry Seal was involved with.
Our first story tonight concerns more information on the connection between the Contras in Central America, the United States government, and cocaine. When we first reported that connection 3 months ago, we told you that the White House and the CIA had used known drug traffickers to arm the Contras. The guns were brought down to the Contras, and the drugs were brought back to the United States. The CIA called our story scandalous defamatory journalism at its worst. The current congressional hearings investigating the Iran-Contra scandal have not dealt with these drug charges, even though many of those accused of drug trafficking worked for Oliver North in the network he set up to supply the Contras. But now there's another committee, just across Capitol Hill, that's taking the drug connection much more seriously. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has recently started its own hearings behind closed doors. One of the operations that committee will likely look into is the subject of our report tonight. It's an operation that raises disturbing questions about how the American government kept the Contras supplied with guns and money when it was illegal to do so, and who the American government tapped to do the dirty work. The operation involves an obscure little shrimp company that has a strange relationship with the State Department, the CIA, and the men who worked for Oliver North.
What we have here is the disgraced retired Lieutenant Colonel of the US Marine Corps, Oliver North, alongside retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin.
First of all, I want you to understand that my children are Jewish. Just by Jewish law, my children are Jewish because their mother is Jewish. So I have a deep passion for Israel.
It just so happens that Boykin's Delta Force were also extensively involved in Central America, fighting the Salvadorian revolutionary group Farabunde Marti National Liberation Front, and assisting the Central Intelligence Agency funded Contras in Nicaragua. Meanwhile, North was a national security staff member during the Iran-Contra affair, which he played a key role in. North used a National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty, NEPL, which was a shell company set up with religious right financier Nelson Bunker Hunt of the Hunt dynasty and support for the Contras fighting the Sandinista government. This assistance was sought because an earlier attempt to rescue the hostages carried out by Delta Force called Operation Eagle Claw disastrously failed. The funds came from weapon sales North claimed partial responsibility for, including the sale of 2,000 anti-tank missiles through Israel to Iran, in exchange for Iranian assistance in freeing American hostages. Boykin was part of the failed mission, describing it as the biggest disappointment of his professional career because he didn't bring home 53 Americans. Despite this, his faith was strengthened, believing he had witnessed a miracle. Quote, "Not one man who stood with us in the desert and pleaded for God to go with us was killed or even injured that night," unquote. Needless to say, this event profoundly impacted Boykin's evangelical faith and may also be the genesis of his personal holy war against Islam, inspired by his hatred of the Islamic Republic, and led him to become a prolific Islamophobe and supporter of Israel, other than the obvious. So I've essentially uncovered an amazing revelation. If Boykin's Delta Force mission had been successful, the weapon sales Oliver North admitted to be partially responsible for wouldn't have happened, and there probably wouldn't have been an Iran-Contra. Also, we might not have found out as much as we have about covert operations in Central America and all of the gun running. That is quite amazing. So getting back to the Iran deal, you can kind of understand why Boykin would be such an outspoken critic of it, and how it inspired the decision to plan a coup against Obama. So following the Iran deal getting ratified, this network announced a Tea Party rally against the nuclear deal. The struggling event needed some star power, and the Tea Party was desperate for any kind of name recognition for the event and for their movement. Ironically, it was Ted Cruz, who would be one of Donald Trump's early political victims, that invited Trump, which he accepted. Trump wasted no time in simultaneously bashing the Obama administration, lying through his teeth and extolling the merits of his own negotiating power.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's such an honor. I was called by Senator Cruz a few days ago, and he said, "Do you think we can get a really good crowd out here to protest this incompetent deal?" And I said, "Boy, can we get a crowd." And that was 3 days ago, and look what shows up. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you. So I've been doing deals for a long time. I've been making lots of wonderful deals, great deals. That's what I do. Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran.
Armed with his low information talking points, Trump tested the waters with his formula, and it worked like magic.
They will not let Israel survive with incompetent leadership like we have right now. Israel will not survive.
Trump and this network would go on to use the Tea Party movement as a base starting point to launch his own movement, copying the Make America Great Again slogan of the Reagan-Bush 1980 campaign that inspired the evangelical Christian voting bloc to mobilize politically, backed by the same network. This time, however, Trump was their man, and with his most iconic accessory in campaign history, the Trump MAGA brand consumed the right wing. In March 2016, before Trump became the Republican nominee, he gave a speech at the AIPAC conference heavily focused on the Iran nuclear deal.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state. But I didn't come here tonight to pander to you about Israel. That's what politicians do. All talk, no action, believe me. I came here to speak to you about where I stand on the future of American relations with our strategic ally, our unbreakable friendship, and our cultural brother, the only democracy in the Middle East, the State of Israel. Thank you. My number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran. Thank you. Thank you.
Those in attendance ate Trump's spiel up, applauding extensively. With Trump and the Israel lobby politically aligned on the Iran deal, he was sure to get their support if he received a Republican nomination. The Iran deal was such a useful issue for the Trump campaign. It provided the perfect opportunity not only to sell to the public that they needed a better deal maker in charge, but allowed Trump to win the support of the pro-Israel groups domestically and anti-Iranians abroad.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one. Thank you. And when I say something, I mean it. I mean it. I will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately. I have known him for many years and will be able to work closely together to help bring stability and peace to Israel and to the entire region.
One of the more interesting donors to the Trump 2016 campaign was Cerberus Capital Management. Billionaire Steve Feinberg is a founder of Cerberus. He has been a significant donor to both Republicans and Democrats. He initially backed Jeb Bush in the 2016 election cycle, but later donated almost $1.5 million to the pro-Trump Rebuild America Political Action Committee. When Trump took office, Feinberg served on the Intelligence Advisory Board. With Trump's most recent return to office, Feinberg has been serving as the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Feinberg Cerberus was a parent company of DynCorp, a private military contractor receiving 98% of its annual income from US federal funding. The company has been embroiled in controversy, including controversial hirings posing conflicts of interest. sex trafficking of minors, murder, providing weak oversight, lack of sufficient resources and control to adequately carry out task orders. As a result, more than $2.5 billion in US funds were vulnerable to waste and fraud. One of Feinberg's companies, Tier 1 Group, received a government contract from a DoD while he was there to conduct military special operations training in Saudi Arabia prior to the gruesome assassination of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, carried out by a Saudi Special Operations Tiger team. The Saudi Crown Prince's right-hand man, General Ahmed Asiri, assigned the Tiger team to carry out the assassination of Khashoggi, was also the point of contact for the Crown Prince's offers of help to the Trump presidential campaign. During the Mueller investigation into interference in the 2016 presidential election, it was found that a lobbyist representing the interests of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, a convicted pedophile, George Nader, made a $2 million payment for undisclosed reasons in November 2016 to Joe Zamel, an Israeli specialist in social media manipulation who co-founded a private intelligence agency, Psy-Group. He is also the founder and chairman of Wikistrat. Psy-Group worked on the I Vote Israel 2016 Get Out the Vote campaign for the Trump campaign, targeting dual citizen Americans living in Israel. The $2 million undisclosed payment could be part of the Saudi help offered to the Trump campaign, covering the costs of Zamel's work. It could also include payment for other more sinister activities. A month later, Nader made another payment to one of Zamel's other companies, White Knight, for an alleged copy of a presentation demonstrating the impact of social media campaigns on Donald Trump's election victory. Nader and Zamel first met in June 2016 at the St. Petersburg International Forum. Psy-Group had a couple of very interesting Russian oligarchs as clients, Oleg Deripaska and Dmitry Rybolovlev. According to investigative journalist Scott Stedman, Psy-Group was owned by Mikhail Shlipenchuk, a Russian oligarch and Duma minister. In August 2016, Nader and Zamel met with Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Prince at Trump Tower, offering assistance to Trump's presidential campaign. Nader previously knew Eric Prince. Bizarrely, they met in Iraq during the Iraq War, when Nader volunteered to act as a shadow diplomat connecting US politicians to Middle East officials. Eric Prince, founder of security firm Blackwater, hired Nader to help with contracts with the Iraqi government. In a 2010 deposition, Prince identified Nader as a business development consultant. Zamel pitched a social media manipulation campaign, likely regarding targeting Americans in Israel and the Iran deal. Trump Jr. reportedly responded favourably, and Nader subsequently had frequent meetings with Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn and Jared Kushner. The Times reported that Prince had arranged the August 2016 meeting. Both Eric Prince and Steve Bannon were a part of Cambridge Analytica and their targeted psychographics and illegal data harvesting campaign aimed at getting Donald Trump elected. As previously mentioned, Michael Flynn was deeply involved with the QAnon psychological operation. He is part of a group of generals Corsi mentioned having a pact with Trump. Flynn was fired by Obama as Defense Intelligence Chief due to insubordination after the Army Lieutenant General failed to follow guidance from superiors. Flynn had previously been invited to the GRU headquarters and also attended a banquet with Russian President Putin. Following the success of the Trump campaign, Psy-Group and Cambridge Analytica formed a strategic partnership in a joint bid to win business from the US government and other clients from the 2016 election, according to people familiar with the matter. I was a person who discovered that Israeli intelligence already had a liaison working for Cambridge Analytica, the self-proclaimed whistleblower Brittany Kaiser. Scott Mortman managed Psy-Group's American clients. He was previously an advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu's Prime Minister's office in Israel and currently works for Greenberg Traurig with Mark McKenzie. McKenzie is the son of the Attorney General Michael McCasey, and just happens to be Joe Zamel's lawyer. In January 2017, Zamel met with Saudi Ahmad Asiri, George Nader, Michael Flynn, and Steve Bannon to discuss covert operations to destabilize Iran and the potential of provoking regime change. One of the topics discussed at these meetings was the use of covert operations to assassinate dissidents. Leaked internal documents revealed a Wikistrax senior executive claimed the firm had, quote, recruited Jamal Khashoggi just weeks before his murder and urged a lower-level employee to make contact with other journalists who'd been critical of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The recruitment process was part of a targeted private intelligence operation used to set Khashoggi up, likely infected his phone with NSO Pegasus malware. The malware was found to have been planted on his widow Hanan's phone manually while she was detained at the Dubai airport in the UAE. That begs the question, was it George Nader who obtained the malware on behalf of the UAE via his Israeli friend? What else was Nader up to? In March 2018, the New York Times reported that Nader turned Trump's major fundraiser, Elliot Broidy, into an instrument of influence at the White House for the rulers of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. High on the agenda of the two men was pushing the White House to remove Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, a top defender of the Iran deal in the Trump administration, so he was someone the UAE and Saudi Arabia had no patience for, and Elliot Broidy was not shy about expressing that to the president. The UAE wired a $2.5 million donation to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies via Nader and Broidy. FDD is a neoconservative 501c3 non-profit think tank based in Washington, D.C. and has received much of its funding from pro-Israel billionaires. Needless to say, FDD is a pro-Israel, anti-Iran lobby group due to its focus on Iran and opposition to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. Emails leaked from the FDD revealed that UAE's ambassador to the US had a cosy relationship and exposed the FDD's back channel with the UAE. Under their Iran project, FDD founded the Iran Energy Project, which conducts extensive research on ways to deny the Iranian regime the profits of its energy sector, lobbying for gasoline sanctions to be placed on Iran. Since that time, FDD and its CEO, Mark Dubowitz, have been sanctioned by Iran for advocating sanctions against Iran and working to end the Iranian nuclear deal. In June 2019, Nader was arrested by a federal agent and charged with possession of child pornography and images of bestiality, and for the second time, transportation of child pornography, and held in jail pending trial in Virginia. Also in 2019, he was charged with transporting a 14-year-old Czech boy from Europe for sex at his Washington area home in February 2000. Nader reached a plea deal with prosecutors in January 2020. He pleaded guilty to charges of possession of child pornography and transportation of a minor, and in June 2020 he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Unsurprising to some, Alan Dershowitz sought the possibility of his client, Donald Trump, pardoning George Nader. Even Trump understood the optics on that one. Even Donald Trump understood the optics on that would be very damaging to him. Maybe there is a level of corruption that Donald Trump won't dip below. In conclusion to this part, we can see how domestic networks and foreign states, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates have conspired to undermine US democracy, interfered and manipulated the 2016 election to get a man willing to do their bidding elected to office, a traitor who brands himself as a patriot. They have blatantly abused their power and influence to undermine the United States' foreign policy in regards to Iran and conspired to change it in order to benefit their own selfish agendas. Agendas that align with the United States pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. If there ever was a swamp, this video has helped document it. The network of think tanks and lobbyists operating at the behest of billionaires, foreign and domestic, foreign countries and multinational corporations. The AIPAC model that Israel has utilised, and the fact that nothing has been done about it, has encouraged other nations to do the same, even using the same think tanks. There is seemingly an endless supply of traitors willing to accommodate foreign influence and peddle their own influence to the highest bidder. Foreign elements have sought to have people removed from a government position because they did not like their stance on the Iran nuclear deal. They are emboldened to do such things because of the success of the 2016 election interference campaign, the lack of consequences, and their connections to the Trump administration. This also demonstrates how 2016 was a soft coup. These countries are not allies of the civilized world, have no respect for democracy. They are enemies of the free world, no better than the portrayals of the people they paint as our enemies. These people are power-hungry dictators. In the case of Jamal Khashoggi, we see just how flagrant Saudi Arabia has become, and aside from soaking their public image in blood, have suffered no real consequences. Corporations like TKO Group and the notoriously corrupt boxing world are happy to try to wash the blood away for enough money. The Israelis knew placing the technology they have in the hands of these unrestrained all-powerful men wasn't going to be used with good intentions. Just look at how their own government have used it to target people, including US citizens. That's something else that doesn't get talked about often enough. And just look at what they've done in the last 2 years. Another great example of an unrestrained all-powerful man.